Welcome. This is the first part of my journey towards surviving prostate cancer. Each episode I'll try and go a bit further in my treatment plan and let you know how it's all going. But as I said last week, I'm going to start right at the beginning and recap what's happened already. Now, like most people, I hadn't really thought about getting prostate cancer. At the beginning of this year, I hadn't paid any attention to it. I hadn't asked the doctor for a test or anything. However, two of my friends last year suffered prostate cancer and had both operations and radiotherapy. And that made me aware of what was going on. So at the beginning of May, when my doctor rang up and asked if I could do a routine blood test, I said, of course I would, but would it be possible to have the prostate cancer test at the same time? And she said, yes, just a tick in the box. We can do that very easily. So 2 days later, I had my appointment to go and see the nurse and have my blood sample taken, and it was sent off. The next day, Dr. Tang rang me up and had a chat and told me that my PSA level, as it's called, for indicating if you might possibly have prostate cancer, was a little bit high than it should have been. Because I hadn't had a test before, of course, we couldn't be sure whether that was something that happened slowly or quickly. So she asked me to go into the surgery. Anyway, the next day I went in for my consultation, and the first thing she did was a rectum examination. Now, this sounds very worse than it really is, and she did find that my prostate was enlarged. She also asked me to do a urine sample, which I did, and there was traces of blood in that. So she decided, given all those three things, the higher PSA level, which was at number 7, the enlarged prostate, and blood in my urine, that I should be fast-tracked to our local hospital in Portsmouth for further examination. Now, at this stage, I just want to reiterate how important this test is. As I say, I hadn't done it before, and I'm glad I did now. Now, would you believe it that over half never even discuss this with their doctors or ask for a PSA test? In fact, they don't really think about prostate cancer. And here's some of the figures. Now, we ought to, because actually 1 in 6 males gets prostate cancer at some time in their lifetime. Now, if you catch it early or at a reasonable time, then NHS and our medical teams can do everything. And actually more people die with prostate cancer than from it. So early treatment is really worthwhile and is almost a guarantee for success. So I'd make that point to everyone. Next time you have a blood test, if you're over 50 and male, then ask for a PSA test. The only downside is that it might not be that, and then you're going to have to go through 1 or 2 fairly intrusive stages to find out if you do have a tumour. But I honestly think it's worthwhile, and the earlier you catch it, the better that's going to be. I can't stress that point enough. So following that, I was fast-tracked to QA hospital, and then 2 weeks later, I went to see a consultant. In fact, they did exactly the same as my doctor at the GP surgery had done, but obviously they just wanted to check everything. In addition to that, they just chatted to me about my physical state. They asked about exercise and healthy eating, etc. And the consultant decided that I was a few years ahead of the game in terms of my real age to my physical age. So that was really good news, because he said, if it is a tumour, I think you'll be able to go ahead with all the treatments, including radical surgery and radiotherapy, etc. So straight away, the consultant suggested that I go forward and have an MRI scan to have a look and see if anything shows up in the prostate. So I agreed to this, and shortly afterwards I got an appointment and went back to QA hospital for a scan. Now, this is straightforward, no physical really feelings whatsoever. It's all very relaxed. There's a bit of sound when the machine goes over you, but hardly anything to it. And they even play some music for you to make it more comfortable. And then following that, about 2 weeks later, I had a follow-up consultation at QA Hospital in Portsmouth, where the consultant gave me the results. And unfortunately, it showed a number of shadows in the scan, one particular part which really looked, in his opinion, like a tumour. So he thought I should go ahead with the next stage, which is perhaps in many ways the most important, and that's to have a biopsy. So, on the 25th of June, I went to QA Hospital again for my biopsy. Now, this was a particularly interesting one. They've come a long way in the last few years, and I had what they call a fusion prostate biopsy. When I went in the room, well, first of all, before I went in the room, I had to empty my bladder, get myself comfortable. They briefed me on what's going to happen. I had to sign the forms, etc., to say I understood the risks, and then went in for the biopsy. Now, it's a bit sort of worrying when you first go in there, because you have to lie down and your feet go up in the air in a sort of cradle out of the way, so the surgeon can carry on performing the biopsy in between your legs. There's a team of about 5 people in the room, some of them working obviously with the surgeon, taking the samples, but a technician who's combining those images. So the first thing you do is have a local anaesthetic. While this is sort of taking effect, the technician is putting together those 2 images, the MRI scan and the ultrasound, which has been held by the surgeon. When everything is in place and the local anaesthetic is taken, they start to take the samples. This is a very long needle. It looks frightening, but in fact, I didn't feel anything at all. This is inserted in the skin. Now, in the old days, they used to do it via the rectum because that's a bit closer. But the problem is it's got some downsides. It's a bit more painful, I believe. And more importantly, there could be a possible infection because obviously that area isn't particularly clean. So the new way of penetrating the skin, I think, is a much better way of doing it. And they take about 20 samples altogether. So the computer system has put together those 2 images into a 3-dimensional form and formed a grid and 20 points that the surgeon uses to go in and grab a sample. As I say, I didn't feel anything except when he presses the trigger to take that little sample, you feel a bit of a thud, but no pain at all. And this happens 20 times. So he's doing some from the centre of the possible tumour, around the rest of the prostate, and some outside. And all of these are being used to gauge the stage of the tumour, how far it's gone, and what type of tumour it is. For a few days there was blood in my urine, but seemingly that is very normal. I also had a slight infection, so when I urinated I had a bit of pain, but I phoned up the doctor the next day at my local surgery, and straight away he gave me a prescription for an antibiotic. I took that for, I think it was 5 days, and everything was back to normal. But I would thoroughly recommend it to anyone. And in my next podcast, I'm going to talk to you a bit more about the results and what happened next. So join me next week on my next part of my journey to surviving prostate cancer.